I think it's very important that people read I think it's a transcript of a speech by the founder of Data and Society Institute, or Center, Dana Boyd, where she talks about two important concepts. In a speech, one of which is data voids. And a data void is some place where people want to search for something, but there's not a lot of information around it. And that's fascinating because that's a lot of how the mainstream institutions control us. So I have a very clean example of this. The idea that you can be an immigration restrictionist and a clear xenophile, like everything throughout your life speaks to your interest in foreign cultures, your openness to other people, but you happen to be a restrictionist. There is a complete void. If you go search xenophile restrictionist, you'll probably find me at the top, because what may be a majority position in the United States is acknowledged nowhere. So we have a situation in which these data voids are real, and they're created by the unwillingness to report. Now, this is what's radicalizing people.
So that was one of the 4 types of fake news you originally discussed, right? Avoidance of an important topic is actually a type of fake news.
Well, let's see if I can remember that.
Yeah, let's see if you can do it.
All right, so there was algorithmic, there was institutional.
Give me an example of each one as you're doing it.
Algorithmic fake news has to do with there's something important, but you can't find it via search, and it's downranked so that it's effectively suppressed, and something else is accentuated. There was institutional, where any institution that wants can broadcast information and people treat it as if it's news, but individuals cannot do this. Then there was narrative fake news, where the New York Times is the principal offender here, which they figure out the narrative arc ahead of time. And we don't know why they would do that, because the facts haven't come in, but they have an idea of how the facts should be organized as they come in. And then there's just false news.
Yeah.
So these
but wasn't one of them, oh, so the first one is what you're saying, where the avoidance part
is the closest.
Got it, okay.
But sometimes that occurs just naturally. Like, what if nobody thought, why don't we have articles on xenophile restrictionists? Oh, we just forgot, we forgot about what may be a majority position in the United States. But it's like, it's so large that it's pretending that you can't find an aircraft carrier in a community harbor. So that's what makes people crazy. So the big data voids, if you will, are people who believe that, let's say, that trade is generally good, but that it isn't a rising tide that raises all ships, and that you have to do work around it to make sure you don't decimate communities and states. You know, there was very little real work done on what the effects of trade would be. Immigration, we just mentioned. And then there's I believe that there's a linkage between terror and Islam, but I would think Islamophilic, because I'm fascinated by the culture and religion, and find it very easy to you know, socialize in that portion of the world, because it's very similar to many of the values that I hold. By creating these voids, saying don't mention the following obvious fact, because if you do, we have an interpretation. If you disagree with us on policy, we can infer that you're a bad person. A moral failing will have to be affixed to your name in perpetuity. That thing is making people absolutely hate these institutions. Yes, you can believe that there's a link between terror and Islam and not be Islamophobic. Yes, you can believe that we have a problem with the way in which we negotiate trade agreements, and you can still want to be open to the world and not a protectionist at heart. Yes, you can be a restrictionist and a xenophile simultaneously. Those are my big 3 examples of what makes people hate the institutions. And in some sense, I've been thinking that Donald Trump is like a company fragging its senior officers. Like, we don't want to be led by people who tell us that we're deplorable because if you pee on our leg and tell us it's raining, we say, no, you're peeing on my leg, please stop. Right? And those people who want to say, look, we are the natural guardians of America. We know who needs to be deplatformed. We know who shouldn't have access to PayPal. we should be able to write our terms of service in such a way that pure virtue is boosted and not niceness is pushed down.
Right.
And by the way, pure virtue is everybody I like and nobody I don't.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, none of us want to be governed by this. Nobody who loves liberty and loves this particular country and loves the Enlightenment wants to be governed by this. And so this is an unwanted institutional class, and we're trying to throw them off. What happened was, it was so uniform throughout the institutions that they couldn't field candidates that spoke to this fed upness. I mean, we're just fed up. Who are these baby boomers who are entitled to tell us how to think? And I'm saying this as somebody who comes, from the left. It shouldn't be a left-right distinction.
Yeah.
More or less, people who have interesting perspectives as individuals are looking at this and saying, we know you're trying to get us off the platforms. We know your engineers hate us. Are you reading our DMs? Are you going through our emails? What are you doing over there? Dana Boyd brought up a very interesting issue, which she called strategic silence.
Oh, yeah.
And the idea, which isn't a bad one initially, is that if somebody should not have their voice amplified, let's imagine that you have a manifesto and you decide that you're going to kill 30 people, and in the desire to figure out what the motivation is, that you're going to have your manifesto broadcast all over the world. So the Unabomber didn't kill 30, but he killed killed a few people and maimed some people, and his manifesto was read widely. So strategic silence is the idea that reporters should not be played or used, and they should be silent about certain things. I think that what she did not realize is that this much strategic silence cannot function in an intelligent, open society. People are simply too mute in the press about all sorts of things that the rest of us have a very legitimate interest in knowing. And if you're going to be strategically silent, you should be sharing the idea that the policy of this paper is that it doesn't look at motive on individual instances unless it constitutes a pattern. But like if you take terrorist killings, when somebody reports, 10 people were killed today and the attacker said something religious in a foreign language at the end, you're not helping things. You're creating a belief that there is some kind of conspiracy. And we don't know what that's about. Is it an honest desire to protect our vulnerable communities, in which case many of us would be supportive? Or is it because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has some relationship with our government that may be strategic that we will want more information about? Is that a special favor to a foreign power? I don't know what that is. But what I do know is that if people are dying and that there's a motive that's linking multiple killings, for example, you can't afford strategic silence and pretend that this thing just doesn't exist. I think that that's partially where our overlords in the institutional class are so far off, is that they're not realizing that there's no possible way to get away with this level of strategic silence. And that's what created Donald Trump, is that he was willing to break strategic silence everywhere. And people were willing to say, look, he may be crazy, he may be immoral, but at least he's not under the thumb of whatever this thing is.
Right.
I just don't like being lied to in terms that a stupid child would never accept. Because these lies, I need better lies. No, I do. This is what I talk about, adult-level fiction.
Are you talking about the lies of the gated institutions, or are you talking about the lies of Trump?
No, the gated institutional narrative. Yeah. I understand that you want to not create an incentive structure so that people murder people so that they can get their message out and amplify. That makes good sense to me. And when we get to the point where this thing is big enough, we may have to consider all of the issues that the traditional media had to consider. However, what is absolutely not acceptable is nobody from the State Department has ever contacted any one of us and said, hey, I'm a little bit worried as to what you guys are doing. Do you understand how this fits in? Can you come in? We understand that you guys are trying to do good, but let us tell you what U.S. objectives are. I've never been a part of any conversation like this in the last 20 years.
Right. Vox, Salon, and BuzzFeed thinks we're so dangerous, and yet Nobody's getting radicalized in the name of Eric Weinstein.
Well, but we're also
De-radicalized,
most of us are patriotic, and I will definitely tailor some of what I say to national interests if I'm aware of what those national interests are. But if you're not contacting us and then you're smearing us, and that's your only means of control, you're not talking about a free society. You're talking about a Potemkin democracy, and I'm not going to participate in your Potemkin democracy. Either have the conversation or be prepared that nobody's going to obey your strategic silence, and you can get rid of all of us, but you're not going to get rid of the number of people who are going to take our seats. And the more force you use to get rid of us, the more you're going to radicalize people in the name of liberty. And I think that this is very important, that this is really a war over sense making. And we have a right to be, I want to state this rather emphatically. This idea of deplatforming sensible, rational people who are smarter than the people who are being platformed, who are more moral, more decent, and saying, well, you can't come in because you're not part of the narrative agreement. That's how you get something like the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to say thank you to things like the Rubin Report, we are taking the pressure off of the system. You are lying so transparently about so many things that no sane or smart person as an adult can believe. And thank God there's some place where people can come and say, I thought I was losing my mind, and then here you guys are, and it's clear that you're not radical, you're not mean-spirited, you're not bad-hearted. There's no shortage of PhDs in our system. There's no shortage, comedians as an alternate intellectual universe. You guys lost the plot in the institutional space. Why don't you come out to the Comedy Store? Why don't you come out for dinner? The next time we have it. Why don't you call us into Washington and say, look, here's what our strategic objectives are, and we'll say, okay, you can't lie that much to people, but what you can do is you can present the truth in different ways and stop making everyone feel like they're being gaslit.